My guest this week is Vanessa Briscoe. Vanessa's first wave band Pylon helped solidify the Athens music scene and influenced the 80s and 90s American pop underground. AllMusic wrote that Pylon's role as elder statesman of the alternative rock explosion is unassailable. Pylon, formed in 1979, broke up several times and formally ended with the death of guitarist Randy Booley in 2009. Along with R.E.M. and the B-52s, Pylon is part of what is considered the Big Three of Athens music, and were among the first artists to be enshrined on the Athens Music Walk of Fame. Since 2014, Vanessa has been making music in Pylon Reenactment Society with friends from her former Athens, Georgia recording project Supercluster. PRS aren't just a tribute band. They've written new songs with Pylon as their guiding star. Their debut album, Magnet Factory, releases February 9th, 2024 on Strolling Bones Records. And the band features Vanessa Briscoe, guitarist Jason Neesmith, bassist Kay Stanton, and drummer Gregory Sanders. And it is my great pleasure to welcome the Revolutions Per Movie, Vanessa Briscoe. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on. I'm so excited you picked classic film Athens, Georgia Inside Out. I have so much to ask you about it, but before we get into it, I want to ask you about you grew up outside of Athens, or where did you grow up?
I grew up between Athens and Atlanta in a very tiny at the time town called Dacula, D-A-C-U-L-A. It's like Dracula without the R. You know, I was in the high school marching band, in the chorus and the debate team and one act play and all that. It was a very small school. And then when I was 17, I went to the University of Georgia. It was the only school I'd ever applied to go to study art. And I've lived here ever since 1973.
I want to ask you about the growth of the town too, but I know that you went to school for art. Where were you at with music?
Oh, I've always loved music and been a fan, but I never had any intentions on having a career in music. I mean, I originally entered the art program to become an art teacher.
Okay.
But then I became enamored of the drawing and painting program there. And I had a lot more in common with those kids than I did with the college education kids. And that's what I ended up studying. But as far as music goes, I've always been a fan, and I was happened to be in Athens when the B-52s first took off, and the beginnings of what's considered the modern music scene in Athens. We had a great student station, WOG, that would play things, little carts and things by the new bands that were coming up, and the singles, when they happened. And we also had a record store called Chapter 3 Records, which was right across from, the campus of UGA. And we also had a really thriving party scene, because at the time there really weren't any clubs for new music to play. There were mostly clubs where you would have a band come in and play the entire week, and they would do covers,
Right.
like the Swinging Medallions would come in, and it was like a real frat, music scene at those places like the B&L Warehouse. So, but then UGA, they would get national acts when they came through, like Hard and, Elton John and,
Right.
people like that. And so, between that and Atlanta being fairly close to drive to, there was no shortage of bands to go and see and things to do.
Were you going to see underground music in Atlanta before you came up to Athens, or was that kind of a new scene to you once you started college?
That was a newer scene to me. I mean, I remember when I first saw the first Ramones and Blondie and Talking Heads albums at Chapter 3. And at that point in time, it was possible to own all of the new music that was coming out. Like Elvis Costello, for instance, and
Sure.
there's so many bands, of course, like Para Ubu, and whatnot. We did have some underground bands in Athens, Atlanta area. Like there was one called the Fans.
Oh, Peter loved the Fans. He wanted to put out a
Hmm.
record by them, but I guess the members couldn't get along. So, but that to him, that was one of his favorite bands from the region for sure.
Oh yeah, they were great. Like anything else, a lot of really great bands were undermined by their own personal problems, and
Sure.
I'm not exactly sure what they were, but I know that one of the members, right before they were going to play some big show in New York or whatever, just decided to disappear for a week. That type of thing.
Yeah. No, it's kind of classic. you know, those stories are universal, no matter what music scene you're part of. From the outside, it looked like Athens was this massive scene, but it was small, correct? Like when I visited Athens, still to this day, I still see the frat and Greek culture on the campus. You're loading in at the 40 Watt, and across the way, there's this big, frat house, and they're having keggers outside and cranking tunes. And it's just such a weird thing to be like, oh, yeah, John Cameron Mitchell's going to be playing here in a bit. But meanwhile, we've got like Hair of the Dog by Nazareth being played just feet away. So, what was the dynamic of that scene like?
Well, that's true. There were several things going on at once, like they would be in, many college scenes. What we consider the modern music scene that started with bands like the Fans and the B-52s and whatnot, that grew. At the same time, there was also this real thriving frat scene, and they didn't exactly like these kids. As a matter of fact, some of them, I heard a story. There were a group of them, and I think Michael Stipe was in that group, that got jumped by a bunch of frat guys and beaten up.
Wow.
And then, of course, a year later, they'd be blasting REM out of their house or whatever.
A lot of the interviews we've had on here, people really, there was a different era where you definitely got picked on for just liking music that was different and threatening to someone. It was kind of amazing.
And dressing a little bit different. It was a core group of maybe 50 to 75 individuals that would be guaranteed to show up for everything. They were centered in the UGA Art School and also in a local eatery that was a vegetarian restaurant called the El Dorado.
Okay.
And you could put most of the members of most of those early bands as coming from one or the other of those two places, or at least having one member from one of those two places. As a matter of fact, I drew a big diagram for that for a guy who was doing his thesis back in the 80s. And they ended up blowing that up and making a poster out of it. If I'd known they were going to use it for that, I wouldn't have been so messy
Right.
writing it all out. But you have to make a scene, really happen. You have to have a tipping point, and we had that tipping point. We had the right number of people who were super involved and vested in making that scene fun, and coming out and going to the parties, and going to see the B-52s and whatever. Then when they left town, there was kind of a void in the party scene, and
Right.
that's kind of where Pylon stepped in.
Right. Because it seemed like so many of the bands in Athens, the goal was to get people to dance, not just to stand there and like nod their head. It did seem like a party atmosphere.
Yeah, yeah, participate. When you dance, you release all these endorphins and things, and there's so much joy and fun and all of it. I just have very fond memories of that scene. Dancing 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever.
Right. So were you, You were asked to audition for Pylon, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So you knew the people who you were going to make music with. Were you friendly with them, or did you just know them from a distance?
I had I kind of had an inkling, I was friends with Michael and Randy from art school, and I'd gone to see the bees. I guess it was October 1978, and I was sitting up front with my friend Rhonda, and Randy came up and he said, "Did you hear it?" And I was like, "Oh, what?" He said, "Oh, that's the tape for my new band." And I was like, "Oh, really? Oh, that was great." But I don't remember hearing it. I was just being nice to him.
Uh-huh.
And so, later on, um, he asked me to audition. It was February the 14th, 1979. He came into where I was working and asked me to come audition. And I was like, well, I'm just kind of hanging out here waiting for my first husband to graduate from college. I don't have anything better to do. So I did go and audition.
Was that scary, or was that exhilarating, or did you think that you did good, or what were you feeling?
Well, I came in, I knew Michael and Randy and I pretty well because I'd had some art classes with him. Curtis, I didn't really know so well, but I'd seen him. And I came in and they had a notebook set up and a microphone and had written like 5 or 6 songs. And they'd play a song and then I would try to get the words to fit. Michael had written a lot of the words. And
Okay.
I think at the time he wasn't really thinking about rhythm or how they would fit into the music. So
Right.
I was having to try really hard to make some of them fit into what they were doing. Like I might extend a word out or, chop it up or squeeze it all together or whatever.
Uh,
And so, you know, they finished up and they went, well, thank you. We'll let you know. And so I was just like, well, I wonder what this is. And so the next day, Randy called me up and said, you're in. Um, and he explained the premise was that we were going to go to New York, get written up in New York Rocker, and then disband. And
oh wow.
I thought, well, that's not going to take up too much of my life. Okay, I'm going to do this.
Why? What was the goal of that? Was that just because there was just nowhere to go with it, or was it did they think it was humorous to do that, or?
Well, there was probably some humor involved in that, but also, it was like, well, we came from an art school where we were used to presenting a project and then it
Right.
was over with.
Right.
So
Sure.
it's kind of the same thing. It was an art project. It
Yeah.
had a goal. We were going to have a show. And what ended up happening is we weren't written up in New York Rocker for several months or whatever, but we were written up in Interview Magazine. And that was kind of like, Curtis said, I think we had the goal of being in, U.S. News and World Report, and we ended up in Life Magazine.
Right. Right. Totally. So, were you playing out a lot at this time?
Oh yeah, we toured quite a bit. I think I counted up the first time we were together. I think we played like over 350 shows. We went out west 3 times, which is quite a trip, and
Yeah.
New York, Northeast corridor, all the way up to Boston and back. Was a well-worn, um, series of dates for us up and down through there. About every 6 to 8 weeks, we would go play up there.
You were writing the lyrics at this point, correct?
Yeah, I took over the lyric writing, not too long after that.
Did you write the lyrics beforehand, before you heard the music and fit it in, or did you hear the music and then try to create something around what was structured?
Well, it kind of happened different every time. I know, well, here's one example. We wrote the song K Michael and I were like, we need some lyrics. And so we played a Scrabble game and used the words to write the lyrics, like
Oh, that's great.
each word we came up with would be used in one of the sentences or couplets of the song. M Train, um, that's the only one that Randy plays bass on. And how that happened was is Michael had to go to the bathroom. So Randy walked over and picked up the bass and started playing. And I just started singing those words. And it kind of pretty much wrote itself, you know.
Wow.
And Crazy, that was almost the same kind of thing. That song pretty much wrote itself. I mean, Randy had just gotten a new um, Supro um, hollow body, which had a really beautiful tone. And he started, messing around and um, he started playing, those riffs. And I was like, just started singing the words.
All right.
But sometimes I would take a tape home and have to like really work at it. It wasn't always that easy. So it's different. It's different every time.
What about a song like Stop It, which is so brief in its language and cryptic and fun and weird? Like where did that come from, for instance, that song?
Well, Michael wrote those lyrics down, and basically it was like, don't rock and roll now, rock and roll. And I was like, what am I going to do with this? Okay, I'm going to approach this real seriously. And even though it was like kind of funny to all of us,
Right. That's amazing. I love it. I mean, did you feel from, the first single to, Chomp, that like the language of Pylon shifting in terms of music and where you're going lyrically? Did you feel like a big growth, or did you feel like you were always kind of staying in the Pylon sound?
Well, the fact that it was those particular four people, no matter what we did, it was going to sound like Pylon.
Right.
And, I mean, uh, we could write a ballad and be Pylon, or we would write a crazy little tune like Precaution and be Pylon too. They were all Pylon. They just, some of it was from Randy's tuning, which he used an alternate tuning.
Okay.
And some of that was maybe from the way that Michael, his bass resonance had a sound to it. It was kind of like more of a high end kind of bass sound and lugubrious, I guess you would say, danceable. But the combination of the bass and the drums, Curtis was really our secret weapon. If we hadn't had
Absolutely.
a good drummer, we wouldn't have gone anywhere, even with all of that. It would have just been like, it would have been too art school. But he was the one that put that four in the floor kind of beat on it that
Right.
made it danceable.
No, I heard it for the first time in a record store, and it sounded amazing in a record store. You had those experiences where you just turn and you're like, what are you playing? And like, can I buy this right now? Can I steal this from your hands? Because, the record clerk wants to take it home too. And I want to ask you about, the Pylon Reenactment Society as well as we get into the film and to the Pylon section. But it's kind of fascinating because this film came out, it was made in 1986, or it came out in 86.
It came out, I think, late 86. They filmed my part January the 28th, 1986. I can remember
Okay.
because that's the day the space shuttle blew up.
Oh my God. Wow. Yeah, of course. So it's an interesting film. First time filmmaker, Tony Gayton, who also did the Dexter Two Headed Cow film later on. It was so rare to have a film document a scene that we could see. I mean, there just wasn't many films like this. There was maybe like Erg, A Music War before it. There was like Dance Craze about the UK ska movement. But to have the focus on an independent music scene. Um, and it came out on VHS. You know what I mean? You could find it at a rental store or at a Tower Records. You know, if you didn't have much access, you could find it, and the soundtrack as well. It was a complete rarity. But by the time this film came out, the early wave was already over with Pylon and B-52s and other things. Did that feel weird that it came out in a time where there was like another scene coming that was just being born out of it?
Well, yeah, I think that you're right. It did seem a little odd, and that it's like the early scene. There were still bands that were around, like the Method Actors and Love Tractor and whatever who'd been there at the beginning. But the B-52s, even though they maintain close ties to Athens, Georgia, because they had family here,
Right.
had moved away. And I think, that was like part of the management decision at the time. Um, but R.E.M. were just about to start hitting their stride. So it was very exciting for them. For me, Pylon had been disbanded for several years. We had played our last show for the first Pylon, December the 1st, 1983. Um, and so it was several years later. I was, kind of like when they asked to come film me, I was just kind of like, well, why do they want to do that? But my husband's band,
Yeah.
Squalls, were in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was fun to see. And then after I was filmed, that's when I became pregnant with my first daughter. So I had my first daughter January 1987. And, there were a few years there. It was just like it seemed like people were not forgetting about Pylon. One reason was this movie, and another one was that R.E.M. had covered Pylon's song Crazy, which ended up on the B side of Driver A.
That was a big deal for a lot of people. I know a lot of people who discovered Pylon because of that.
Yeah. And it was like, so, that those two things were some of the things that led into Pylon not being forgotten and us getting back together the second time in 1988.
No, it's interesting because I knew people at this stage who were driving out to Athens to just walk around. I know people who went to college in the mid 80s because of the music scene there. It was like when, the B-52s, I had those records, but I never knew where they were from. I never knew they were an Athens band. I always assumed they were New York. Like, I didn't know what Athens, Georgia was until I heard R.E.M. And then it was like I discovered, Love Tractor and Pylon and all these other things. But it's interesting that I knew more about Athens than I knew about Atlanta. I knew more about Athens than I knew about, the Chicago scene at the time. And it seemed totally worthy, but it must have been surprising because it was still such a small scene.
It was surprising, and there were people moving here for their bands to become part of the scene. I don't know that they necessarily expected that they were going to become, R.E.M. or whatever, but
Right.
I think anytime you have a good energy spot, like that you are going to have people drawn to it. It happened in the 60s with San Francisco and Los Angeles, and in the 70s with New York City, and, then up in the Northwest with the grunge scene,
Right.
in the 90s, so you would have people going where the action was. And at one point, they were calling us the San Francisco of the South because we had 350 bands
What?
based in our little town.
That's incredible.
Crazy, I know.
That is amazing. Yeah, so they narrow it down to about a dozen bands. And I think it does a good job of just showing that they're not concentrated on bands that are REM adjacent. Not everything sounds like jangly. So, the Barbecue Killers, I'm just like, oh, whoa, okay, this is different. Time Toy. Okay, that sounds nothing like what I thought would come out of Athens, because I just had a really narrow scope. But I thought that they did a pretty good job of showing just how the scene was diverse. But did you feel like there was anything that you would have loved to have seen documented in it?
Well, there was, one in particular. I think that OOK were in there. It would have been nice to see them. There were a whole bunch of bands who would have been good in the movie, but for whatever reason, the ones that they chose were the ones that they chose, and you can't go back and predict the past.
Was Limbo District? They were really short lived as well, right?
Limbo District were in the movie, in that they used Jim Herbert, part of his video in their
Right.
carnival, and Jeremy Ayers, they tried to film him, who had written
Right.
lyrics for B-52s and for R.E.M, and also was kind of like very, very important to the scene, and, stylistically and whatever. But he didn't want to be filmed at all.
Oh, okay.
He was like didn't want any part of it. But I think they did get him and some friends like beating on some percussion instruments out in the yard.
Oh, that's Jeremy in that at the where they're just okay. I never knew the context of that footage.
Yeah.
I mean, you could take that and put it in the Elephant Six documentary, and it would just be just timeless.
Oh yeah. And he was one of my neighbors. He was like such a fun person. He had been one of Andy Warhol's people at the factory. He had a persona,
Right.
silver thin. He was a transvestite, very beautiful. He's actually one of the most beautiful men I've ever seen personally, and just very, very influential to so many people. But he wouldn't agree to be filmed. And so the fact they have the Limbo District footage from that music, that's wonderful.
The film does a pretty great job of out of the gate. You get a sense of the surroundings of Athens. Like there's a montage at the top of cows and tractors and people just walking around and making art and just kind of like standing in the street, and Walter's barbecue, and they show the outside of some of the venues and things like that. But it was really funny when the last time we played in Athens, we got this Airbnb, and they had this film as one of the things you could, in their house. Like, we have Athens, Georgia Inside Out. And so we put it on, and Jonathan, who's in the band but also went to college in Athens, was like pointing everything out. He's like, "Oh, there's Ort." And I'm like, I hadn't seen it in a while. I was like, "Yeah, who is Ort? Can you tell me a bit about why he's kind of I don't know, he's like the thread throughout this film."
Oh, they used him as a narrator, and it is he was the perfect choice because he had been here so long. He's also, he's a little quirky. He's since passed on. This guy had like in his encyclopedia for a brain, as far as his knowledge of music and of course the Athens music scene, but not just Athens music, but all music. I mean, when he died, his house was so full of like singles and flyers and stuff. The floor had actually collapsed. So that was quite an archaeological dig going on there from his friends and whatnot. He were pitching in on that, but he was perfect, and that he was well spoken.
Yeah.
He was interesting, quirky. He also, that Fred Schneider had worked for Ord.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Ord had a record store called Ord's Oldies, and Fred worked in there part time. That's actually the first time I think I ever actually spoke to Fred, and this was before the B-52s, were really a thing. Fred also worked at the Eldorado restaurant as a waiter or waitroid, as they called it. So, these people were embedded in the community. Ward had been here the entire time, so he was like the perfect choice to be the narrator.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
And he seemed like, again, you're right. He's such a great force to come in and just be like, come this way, come into this empty room. Let's talk.
Yeah.
It's super charming.
Oh, yeah. And, he was doing things that, later on kind of became a 90s and 2000s thing, and that he collected and knew about craft beers around the country. He was into barbecue, singles, traveling and whatnot. And he had a column in the local paper for the longest time, which was just perfect. So having him in this movie, even though, there are some flaws in it, according to some people who live here, I think it's great that these people like Ward and people like John C. Wright, who've passed on, there is a record of them,
Right. Well, what are some of the flaws that people who live in the city had with the film?
Well, they were like, why did they choose these particular bands? Why did they film this? How come there's, like some people were like, well, these folk artists don't even live here in Athens. Why are they in this movie? Whatever.
Right.
But the people who made the movie, I think they made it's like a little window that you can see into time. You can't quite see everything, but you can see what they want you to see of this particular time period. And I think it's wonderful personally.
Yeah, it's definitely made with total awe and love. And I do think one of the cool things about the film is, and I get it geographically, it may be not making sense, but I like that James Herbert is in there showing his paintings. And I like that, at this point, Howard Finster is kind of a name. Everyone just kind of knows his work. I mean, I first saw it during that Radio for Europe video, and I just couldn't figure out what I was seeing, his garden and everything, and then walking through it. And then who's the reverend that they go visit outside of Athens? He did folk art as well. He and his wife are playing music together.
Reverend Reith.
Right. I thought it was kind of cool that it wasn't just all music. All right, here's some food stuff. Here's some personalities. Again, like I didn't know that's Jeremy just playing in the woods with some friends. And the film never overstays its welcome too. It's never like, oh, this is an R.E.M. film and we're just going to really lay it on thick here, because that's the gateway into this film for a lot of people. It kind of is nice that they do a thing and then they're gone for quite a while and then they come back and, Peter's in his pajamas talking and showing us his Elvis collection. But I think I think it's pretty lovely. And as somebody who was shot for the Sub Pop grunge movie Hype, because I was on and got cut from it, I'm just like, yep, been there. I've been in films where I'm like, I'm not in it anymore. But it's like, if you have 350 bands like you're talking, I mean, there's no way to win.
No, there's no way to please everybody. So it comes down to the vision of the artist, the one who was actually directing it and editing it, and like you're right, that B-roll that they shot of the surroundings of Athens and downtown Athens, that particular Athens doesn't exist anymore. So it's nice that there is a record of it, you know?
Yeah, how do you feel about the growth of Athens? I mean, it's not necessarily. I mean, it was a very affordable place to live when you were living there in the 70s and 80s. And from talking to people, it's not necessarily as economically easy for art weirdos to do their thing there.
Oh no, it's not. That's one thing that's happened is especially since the pandemic, I've noticed that they've had investors come in and um, housing prices, like many places throughout the country, are just through the roof. And so, I mean, at least for here. So, so for a musician to just have like a crummy job, working wherever, they can't survive on that crummy job and make music anymore. They have to have 2 or 3 crummy jobs, and it's driving some of them out of the community. But I don't know what we can do about that.
It's national, and it's hard because part of the excitement when you're young is just living with a bunch of, people you barely know and just figuring it out and having jobs that you can leave and come back to, and just not having to be worried about your future.
Right. Yeah, yeah, and it's you're exactly right. But there it seems to be less and less possible for a young person to have that period of time where they can be irresponsible and
Yes.
not have to worry too hard about if they're going to starve to death.
Right. Have you seen the film recently?
I've seen it within the last 10 years. They put out another edition of
Okay.
it that has some additional footage, interviews from like widespread panic and whatnot. So I saw that, and I saw it when it came out, at the theater. I think I had somebody watch my daughter who was a baby, and I went over there, and the guy taking tickets at the door, he just kind of smirked at me, went, "Oh, you came to see yourself."
Oh, that's horrible. Oh, that's horrible. But what's a theater ticket person supposed to do? I thought you were really honest in the film, and it seemed like you were in a place where it just seemed abstract that you had done this thing, and your place in it. Can you talk a bit about where you were at that point, like just post Pylon?
Well, I was just working and maybe making some art and hanging out with my friends. I had a job at a copy shop, and I was kind of enjoying not being on the road and not having to worry about a whole lot of, you know, like all that traveling and whatnot. It's not stressful so much as um, it's a lot of work, you
Yeah.
know, to get from point A to point B. And we enjoyed it. We did it as long as, we wanted to. And then we came back and did it again and broke up and came back and did it again a little bit. And so, you know,
With the Pylon Reenactment Society, what is the language of Pylon in terms of writing new songs and kind of honoring the language that you created in the past?
yeah, we do use Pylon as our guiding star in that we, the bass is super important to the sound. And of course, the drums and some of the song, it's just like Pylon, some of the songs come quite easily and are written very quickly, and others, I might have to work on them for a couple of months, whatever, until I get them to where, okay, this is this is where I'm going with this. Okay, now I get it, to hone
Right.
it down. Uh, my writing process sometimes is I'm listening and I write a lot of words, and then I start paring them down to more universal ideas, try to make them more concise and tight. But I will start out sometimes pretty wordy. I'm talking Bob Dylan kind of wordy. And I'll
Wow.
just start crossing those words out until I come up with what is the focus or the idea of the song. And so, you know, arranging the song, I'm real lucky in that these people who are working with me now, Kay Stanton, Jason E. Smith, and Gregory Sanders, are all on my wavelength, just kind of like Pylon were on my wavelength. We don't have any arguments about, direction or sound or whatever. We just kind of all get it.
Right.
We let everybody write their part, which is how Pylon did it.
Well, it's interesting in the film you say that you hear your voice and it just doesn't even feel like you. Like you're just like that sounds like somebody else. It's like a little out of body. I know that you did Supercluster and other things as well, but when did you kind of start feeling like you wanted to get back into music?
Well, Pylon had gotten back together in 2004, and basically the focus that time was to make our music available again. It had been out of print for a while. So, Randy and I worked on putting the tapes together for the first two albums for the DFA to reissue on CD, and had taken them to Rodney Mills in Atlanta to be mastered. Unfortunately, Randy didn't see Chomp Moore come out because he passed away early in 2009.
Right.
So, Supercluster had gotten started kind of during that time period too, because Pylon really weren't able to play a whole lot. Because Curtis, he has a career in the TV movie industry, and he'd been called out of town to work on the TV series Lost in Hawaii. He's kind of a plane crash expert. He'd done the plane crash and We Are Marshall, and I guess they saw that for Lost and had him come and do the plane crash stuff in Hawaii. So,
How does someone become a plane crash expert?
you just kind of make it up as you go, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is
Oh, this is kind of a funny story. The one in Atlanta, they filmed We Are Marshall in Atlanta, and he was like, had left the job site to, drive and get something, and got a call from the job site that somebody had been injured. And he was like, oh my God, I hope they were okay. Started racing back. And as he's coming in, he sees like a life chopper coming in over him. He's like, oh my God, this is bad. And he got up there, and the first responders that came to the accident, they thought it was a real plane crash and called in, all of the big guns to come and help him, whatever. But the guy was like just a minor injury or whatever. But, he had a machine that would go and chop the trees off at a certain level, like
oh
the
wow.
plane had come in and like,
Yeah.
broken the trees off at the top, and
Wow.
had all the whatnot scattered around just right. So he was real good at it. I think he might have done 3 plane crashes. I forget the third one. Anyway, he was out of town, and so Randy and I wanted to keep playing, and I had music coming in my head that wasn't exactly Pylon type material. And so that's where Supercluster got us started, as it was a recording project.
Okay.
Although we did play out some, we went and opened some dates for the B-52s in the Northeast. and whatever. But then, we kind of like, we didn't even have like a final show or anything. We just like stopped playing around 2013. 2014, Jason Smith, who had been in that band with me, said, "Hey, I'm putting the music together for this art exhibit called Art Rocks Athens. That's going to examine the relationship between music and art in Athens between 1975 and 1985. Will you come and perform?" And I said, "Well, sure, but you got to help me get a band together." And so he got his band basically Casper and the Cookies to come and back me up on some Pylon songs. And it went really well. And then I was like, well, that was fun. So forgot about it, kind of put it up on the shelf. And a year later, he came back and he said, we're doing it again. There's another exhibit. This one's photography and film associated with that time period. Would you like to come and do it again? They'll give us more time. And I said, yeah, yeah, let's do it. And he had to get another drummer because our drummer, Gregory, who's back, he'd had to have shoulder surgery. So he got Joe Rowe from the Glands to come in, excellent drummer.
That
And
was a great band.
yeah, they were truly, truly great band.
Yeah.
And so, Dressy Betsy heard about it. They had us come and open some shows. And then, we just continue to have people contact us wanting us to come play. So we do. And now we've recorded our first album.
Oh, that's so cool. Like, do you have a favorite Pylon song to perform?
Oh, well, they're all my favorites.
That's the correct answer. That's what I have written down here. You pass. That's great. Hey, I have a question. Is it true or false that a member of Squalls is somewhere in your house at the kitchen doing water and stuff?
He's like, he's gone out on the back deck now. But yeah, that's my husband, Bob Hay.
Right, who's featured in the film. And Squalls, were really interesting in that film. Their interview especially, they seem like one of the people is like, I'm kind of ready to leave Athens. They're ready to go. And people were saying like, oh, no matter how far you go, you'll never be satisfied. And that time in music was really interesting because there were people who were starting to make a career at it. And so the dream seemed to have potential. You've had this long life in art and music now. Is it surprising?
No, it's not surprising in that I honestly, I never really planned any of it. So I just kind of take it as it comes, and I've enjoyed it. And I think that artists are wired a little differently.
Sure.
And that we're going to create whether or not, people necessarily even want to hear us or whatever. We're just going to do it.
There was nowhere to go. So you had to do it just because you loved it. And maybe you got to tour a bit or put out a record. But for my teenage and early life, I just thought, I didn't know bands could self-release records. I just was like, that seems like, I didn't know people were putting out their own stuff. I looked at the label name and the address and just assumed that they'd been picked by the gods to put out this stuff. So that was really eye-opening when I got older to be like, oh, you made these sleeves or this label that seems really big to me, like DB, is not this massive thing. It's just, one or two people trying to release art.
Well, we came in at the beginnings of the DIY movement there. So, what you're talking about, that would have been true for many bands. And, say the 60s and 70s, there would be A&R people who would
right.
go and court a band and decide this is the one we're going to push or whatever. And they would release. And if they didn't sell anything, it would just sink like an anchor or whatever. But if it did anything at all, then they would promote it and, keep working it one way or the other, for some kind of output. It was a business,
Right.
as opposed to like a labor of love or whatever. Some of these DIY bands were putting out all those 7-inch singles,
That was
which are
amazing.
which are still my favorite format.
Mine too. I love singles. I would often get obsessed with just one side of it, just because, oh my God, this song is just incredible. But then you fall in love with the other side, and then the other one gets neglected. It's such a cool format. And I just love that the art tended to be even a little bit more I don't know, tossed off a little bit. Like it just sometimes because when I was in Guided by Voices, Bob was putting out all these singles. That's mostly what he was doing. And Matador was rushing to keep up with his output. But some of them were like, wow, this is barely readable. I kind of loved it. Like the 7-inch format, everything's really tiny and hard to read because it was handwritten and then shrunk down.
Oh yeah, I love. I'm a nerd too. I love reading all that stuff. Getting that magnifying glass out, or now what
Yeah.
we do is we take a picture with our iPhone and blow it up, so
Yeah.
we can read it.
Oh yeah, and the putting secret messages and the run out grooves was always really fun. I remember just being like, "Oh, what a I don't this is a joke with about a friend they know, but who's Chalky? I have no idea, but there's a joke on both sides in the run out groove about Chalky etched into it. It's incredible. I also really enjoyed. I hadn't seen the sequel to this film that had come out a few years ago as Georgia was turning blue. I really enjoyed your interviews and the performances in it because I hadn't got to see the Reenactment Society yet. But it was nice to see, like, oh, okay, finally in the film. And Mariah Parker, is that her name? The
Mariah Parker, yeah,
Yeah, she's
she's
amazing.
since moved on to Atlanta.
Okay.
Very, very bright woman.
Yeah, we played a show with her. It was incredible. Cindy Wilson, really fun to see her perform in it. I was kind of surprised. I had not heard that there was a sequel, but it was kind of fun to see. That was at the same filmmakers who made that as well.
Well, the director and producer was Bill Cody. He was the producer of Athens, Georgia, Inside Out.
Okay.
So he came here probably over the space of maybe 3 years. He would come and take a break from his job in Los Angeles, where he worked for a city councilman out there. And you know, I think his vision of it kind of evolved. I think he wanted to kind of update what was going on in the scene, but what he discovered is, Athens had become more political, and so he was able to tell that story. You know, because of the pandemic, I think it really cut down on where it was shown, but you can get it streaming, and I think you can still get the DVD.
Yeah, I got the DVD. Yeah, it's out there. And I'm going to put in the show notes to this episode. I'll put link to your new record and links to both movies so that people can catch up. But the original Athens, Georgia Inside Out was, again, just such a rarity in terms of access to filmic imagery of bands that I loved and bands I didn't know about, which was really rare. And it looks great. It reminds me a little bit of like a Les Blank film shot in 16 millimeter using natural light. It's kind of a beautiful film that's aged really well in the way it looks.
Yeah, this because it was shot on film.
Right.
Yeah, there's something about that. You can really feel the atmosphere.
Yeah, you can feel the air, the heat, the humidity, the conversations, and just even, like I said, going to see Ort in like a really dimly lit room, vacant room, versus, Jim Herbert showing his art in his studio versus where they filmed you and all the archival footage. I think it's a pretty incredible film. So I was really excited that you picked it and that I finally get to crack open and get some of these things answered. So I appreciate it.
Oh well, it's been so such a pleasure to talk to you and have this conversation. It was very, very exciting for me to come and talk to you today. I mean, good luck with your new record coming out in March.
Oh, thanks. You too. Yeah, well, I hope when we play Athens, it's still one of my favorite cities to play. It just feels great. The audience is so dedicated. I love it. No one is checked out to see you. I just love it still. And it's also exciting for me as a music fan. I still kind of never get over the fact that I'm playing Athens, Georgia. And a lot of it is because of, your band and R.E.M. and this film. It's just, to me, it's like, yeah, New York, okay. But like Athens, I'm like, yes, we're playing Athens. We always end our tours. We always end our tours in Athens. We just do. And there's a reason for it, is we want to go out on a high. And that city really is special. At the end of every episode, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on the film. On a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, how many sets of Peter Buck pajamas do you give this film?
I guess I'll give it 8.5.
That's great. So in one of them, he's either tops or bottoms. So we'll let Peter choose.
I think that you can't go wrong with the bottoms.
Absolutely. No, that was so iconic. And that is exactly what I have written down here, 8.5. So again, we've synced up perfectly. So good to see you. And thank you for doing this. It's been great. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Maybe I'll see you sometime on the West Coast.
It's a given.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday. And if you've enjoyed this, it would mean a lot to me if you would rate and review it on your favorite podcast app. The show is a completely independent affair, so the best way to support the show is through our Patreon at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get weekly bonus episodes and exclusive goods sent to you just for joining. You can also follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye.